Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
David, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. It's good to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you too, Stephen. I'm really looking forward to this.
So, to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about your background?
Okay. Well, my name's David Ray, and I'm the author of Crowman, which is a dark fantasy book that's available on Amazon and all good book outlets, mostly on the internet. I live in Scotland. I have written for a long time, and this is my first full-length novel, and the follow-up to it, Crow Tower, is due out next year. It's in production, so to speak. My background, I've worked in a huge variety of jobs. I've worked as a ditch digger. I've worked in a candy factory. I've worked as a scaffolder. But I've also been to college. I've got degrees, and but not a degree in writing.
I don't think a lot of authors actually have a degree in writing, but it sounds like you have a lot of experience that you've gone through in life. And I think a lot of times the authors, that's much more important to them.
I think I'm a good writer. I think if I'd done a degree in writing, I'd be a better writer. But like you say, I might not have so much to write about. There's lots of really good writing about writing and about being a writer, but I don't know that that's really what I want to write. I want to write about things that are important to me and things that I enjoy and things that I would like to read myself. I'm a big reader. I love...
well, since you brought that up, what types of books do you read? What are some of your favorite authors?
Okay, that's a good question. And we might be here a while. My favorite author probably is Gene Wolfe. I love everything he's written, and I've read everything he's written. But I love classics as well, especially classic science fiction and those genres that lead into it. So I love Jekyll and Hyde. I love The Moonstone. Have you ever read Confessions of a Justified Sinner? You should read that. Have you read Alistair Gray, Walter Scott? Horror movies, horror stories? They are such great writing, so full of ideas, so fresh, even though they were written 100 or more years ago.
I'll have to add some of those to my list. I love the old classic 150 years ago. In some of the newer stuff, I have a small collection of science fiction stories from like the 40s and 50s, because I think that's a great sci-fi era.
Oh, yeah. We're never going to get a better science fiction writer than Ray Bradbury.
Right.
Or John Wyndham.
We have had quite a few good ones. Yes.
We have.
That's the problem, is having this stuff available to you all the time, along with all the new stuff. It's overwhelming, the amount of things that you should and want to read.
But there's great stuff coming out now too.
Yeah. That's funny you say that. I just saw a list today of Time Life had the 100 greatest fantasy books that everybody should read.
And had you read them?
I went through it, and there was about 50 of them that I've read. So a good amount.
Yeah, I would guess I would be the same. And there's some that are probably on it that I have to be honest, read one of their works, but you don't have to read them all. And I'm going to be controversial here and say I'm talking about Lovecraft. I know some people love him, and I know that you have to read him, and I know that it's important that you read it. But once you've read one, that's enough from him. Tolkien, he was great when I was a kid, but I grew up. So I'm trying to think who else would be on that list. But there's probably ones that Robert Jordan. Hopefully he's not even on it.
Yep.
Don't
Robert
read it.
Jordan was on the list.
Don't read
But I
it.
mean, they even had things like Alice in Wonderland and
Nah.
Arabian Nights.
Read Arabian Nights. That's good. Alice in Wonderland. Watch the movie. It's better.
That definitely is a weird book.
Yeah, I've never really got my head around it. I love the
And it's
possibilities of it. A world where
right.
anything can happen.
A friend and I were talking about those this morning and how just having a generic fantasy list is not necessarily helpful to a lot of people because there's so many subgenres that fantasy falls into, and you miss out on a lot of good books, and a lot of those that are on the list, some people won't like because there are other ones that they do like.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Isn't every book fantasy unless it's non-fiction?
Yes, I've had that discussion with people about genre because I've written a middle grade book with wizards and magic. And then I wrote another book that is kind of a steampunkish alternative history set in Britain. And I said they're both fantasy. And they said, no, those are two completely different genres. I'm like, no, they're both fantasy.
Oh, what was the
So,
second? I've written a book like that second one. What kind of genre was that? I'd like to know.
yeah, it's actually, I call it a cozy spy thriller. I went off that whole cozy idea because it's a lighthearted spy thriller. It's like a master and apprentice, kind of like Star Wars was. And it just kind of grew, and it's got some steampunk elements in it. It's like an alternative British history.
Okay,
So
so sort of League of Gentlemen kind of thing.
a little bit, yeah. It didn't really start that way. It just kind of grew out that way. So,
Okay.
David, what got you into writing? Why did you want to write?
I can't not sure I can answer that. I've always written and I've always wanted to write. I wrote in school and I wrote after I left school. I've probably got old school books and jotters that are full of stories that I've written when I should have been doing maths and arithmetic. I can't really say that either my teachers or my parents particularly encouraged me. I just decided, well, a friend retired and decided that they were going to take up writing. And I thought, there's no way I'm waiting until I retire before I get serious about this. So I started off doing microfiction, 50 words, and placing it in where I could, and moving up onto doing larger shorts, and then I got into various magazines and websites. And then I wrote Crowman, and I've written some other stuff that's kind of bubbling under in the background, but that's the first book of that size that I've had published. Crow Tower, the next one, will be out next year, and I'm just at the beginning of the next one in the trilogy, but I do have other pieces that or other projects that are really complete. Discussions are ongoing, as they always are. So it wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just a conscious decision not to quit.
Okay. I guess you listed some other things that you had done in life. Is writing all you're doing right now, or do you still work a different job and this is kind of your second job or your
I work I work as a analyst in the health sector, particularly in public health. So at the moment, I'm looking at all sorts of things about COVID-19 and looking at indicators of how it's being managed or how under control it is and what steps we should be taking or not. And COVID is disrupting our actual health provision in some ways, and do a lot about the mortality stats. It's really fascinating work. I kind of would hate to give it up in a way, but it does take a lot of my time at the moment, and it's cut into my writing time a lot. But I think, if I'm honest, like every writer, the thing that cuts into my writing time the most is not writing. You know, I work 9 hours, 7, 8 hours a day. There's 24 hours in the day. I can't blame my work for if I'm not being productive. I can blame things that are going on in my head, and if I'm not productive on the page, I can still be productive in my imagination, which is an important step before we can.
Yes.
So if I'm not being productive, I never beat myself up about that. Ever. I never beat myself up about anything.
I think a lot of people get down on themselves when they're not writing, and then that just self perpetuates that they, oh, well, I was a loser and I didn't write, so I'm not going to write today. And now I feel worse because I haven't written for 2 days and I don't feel like writing. You just sometimes got to put your butt in the chair and start typing.
That's right. And I think we're going to talk about that in the second part, but fear is a great enemy of the writer. And when we say write, you don't have to write well. You get to revise it,
right?
Get to edit it, but also don't be so negative. Sometimes I feel that everything I write, I've almost got to dream it. It's got to come to me in a dream. If I've not had the dream, then I can't write it. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Let me make
No.
it slightly less weird. I on the face of it, I'm a pantser, but really I'm a planner, and the planning all goes on in my head. And once that planning's done, I can write. But if it's not done, I can't write quite so easily.
And I kind of agree with you there. I've told people that I don't really feel like I'm making up a story so much as I'm peering through a split in reality and I'm looking into another universe, and all I'm doing is reporting what's happening over there. That I'm not, it's like flowing into me. I'm not really making it up. It's
Maybe we
hard to
really are.
understand unless you've actually
Maybe we
experienced
really
it.
are. Maybe we're all tuned into some great hive mind that's trying to tell us all something. Maybe writers really are
Yeah.
the true. Not, we wouldn't be astronauts. What would it be? Universinauts, or I don't know, dimension nauts. Let's make up a word for that. I'll think about it and see if you do too. See if we can come up with a word for it. Psychonauts. I like.
Yeah. Well, Psychonaut was actually a video game, and it had to do with mind things. So we'd probably get in trouble with that one.
Yeah, I don't see how you can. I don't see how you can trademark Psychonaut. We can move to China.
Yeah. Well,
Then it doesn't matter.
right.
Trademark.
Right. If you come up with something really good, I'm fully supporting it. I'll champion it for
But
you.
you're not into Psychonaut.
So for me, I associate that too much with the video game because it's a really good video game. So David, you mentioned your book a couple times. Tell us what it's about, a little bit maybe of where you got the idea from.
It's a dark fantasy, and it's about a world where the sun is kept in a box. It's about what that world is like, and how certain people manage to get the sun out of the box. And it's started in some ways inspired by North American, Western Pacific myths about that very world where the sun is kept in a box, and the trickster, either the coyote or the raven, or in this case the crow, gets the sun out of the box. A kind of imagined characters that would be doing that, how they would get it out, what they would do, what the world would be like. Some of the stories inspired by Japanese manga as well. And a lot of it really talks about my own investigation of darkness. So, for example, is darkness a bad thing? We always think of it as bad, but maybe it's not. And we always think of light as being good, and maybe it's not. And so there's a lot of questions like that going through the writing. But there's also this idea that somebody having everything, the entire sun, creates a really horrible world. And maybe that the idea for that is based on all this sort of Reaganomics and trickle down economics about how we've created this horrible world where prosperity is focused on a very small group, not just to one person, but it talks about that, and it talks about how if we want to be moral and good people, then we have to be moral and good people regardless of what happens to us, and not just expect the world to be all sunshine and lollipops when it's not, and stick to what we believe is the right way to behave and the right things to do. I'm not giving too much of the plot away there, am I?
And did you say that this is going to be a trilogy?
Yes, it is. So the first book really deals with it stands on its own. It goes from the introduction of these characters to the release of the sun into the world. It left so many questions in my mind that the second book is actually more of a prequel. So it talks about how you got to that stage. And then the third book is has ended up being a prequel of the prequel. What's motivating the second and third books is really the questions and challenges that arise from the first and second books.
But they're prequels to each other. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
When you first started the first book, did you plan on it being a trilogy, or was it just you were writing a book?
In the back of every fantasy writer's mind when you write a book is the word trilogy. You can't get away from it. And probably in the back of every writer's mind is the word trilogy. And the other word that's in the back of your mind is of course, book deal. Now, this isn't motivated by a book deal because I don't have a book deal for the third one, only for the second one so far. But I'm confident that if I do a good job, and my publisher will take it up. So it wasn't so much a conscious decision. It was after I'd written the first one, I knew that was kind of expected to me to write a second one. So I've written the second one and I've written a third one. But at the same time, as I said, I wrote I wrote Crowman, and I've gone off and I've done other projects, and they're now nearing completion, where I'm looking to make book deals with them. So and they're quite different to Crowman, very different. One of them is one of them's a children's book for a start, and one of them is a sort of gothic detective story, and then the other one is just as you were saying, it's a sort of alternative history set in early early 20th century England, a sort of cyber, a diesel punk perhaps, more sort of Edwardian than Georgian, and it became almost, how can I put this? It's not about the rapture per se, but it's imagining a world where religion is real, or at least has some validity. Oh wait, that's our world, isn't it? The Bible. Let me put my cards on the table. First of all, I'm a believer, but the Bible, in a sense, is the ultimate fantasy book because things happen in there that are unbelievable. It's not constrained by laws, and the things that happen in it are quite amazing. So imagine that you were a believer. Your faith actually was able to change things, at least to change yourself. In some ways it borrows from J.K. Chesterton's Father Brown, but also it of course it borrows from Gene Wolfe's Long Sun trilogy as well. So it's not I certainly wouldn't describe it as Christian literature, but I would describe it as okay, it's science fiction, but the science is the science of evolution and the science of the, the divine, maybe? Is that too pretentious?
Okay.
If it is, I told
It's
you. If it is too bad.
it sounds reminiscent of like a C.S. Lewis fantasy.
It's not as blatantly religious as that, I don't think. It's
Okay.
subtler. How about that? How about that? I'm complaining because I'm being compared to a great writer. You'd be honoured by that. And I'm like, nah, mine's is better than his. Oh gosh, I'm so vain. That's terrible. You know, if you think of Philip Pullman's, is it a trilogy? that kind of deals with religious themes, but it's not necessarily religious. And I think it probably sits closer to that than some of C.S. Lewis's work. But there would be parallels. But ultimately, it doesn't reject religion and it doesn't reject belief.
Okay. When did it come out, and have people been reading it? What feedback have you been getting? The book's been out for a little bit. What type of feedback have you been getting from people?
Really good reviews, really really enthusiastic reviews. It's kind of Crowman, which is not the alternative history, which we were just talking about. Crowman, the story about the son in the box, has had very strong reviews. People really like the metaphors. One critic even compared it to the Sleeping Giant, which is written by a Nobel Prize winner. So you can't complain about reviews like that.
Right. Yeah.
Just like, why did I complain about being compared to C.S. Lewis? So yeah, it's kind of, dark fantasy is always going to be niche, but for people who like it, they're so enthusiastic, and I'm so grateful. Can I use the word fans? Can I say I'm grateful to my fans? Is that being getting pretentious?
Absolutely.
I have fans. I have people that are quite fanatic and enthusiastic about it, and really are quite almost evangelical about it, and say, "Oh, you must read this book. You must read this book. This book changed my life." And they talk about, they see things in it that I thought I'd hidden far enough away that no one would see them, but apparently not. Particularly about this idea of our behaviour mustn't be shaped by our environment, that we need to make our own decisions, and our decisions to behave well and morally and treat people nicely. And one review.
When you started the book, were those themes a conscious decision, or did they kind of come out as you wrote the book?
They came out as I wrote the book. They came out as you talk about. Although I had a good idea of where this story was going in the broad sense, it's, as you say, you're picking up these pictures in your mind, and then you have to respond to them and think about how you, through the puppets that you have in play in your novel, are going to respond, and what values you think are important for them to display.
Right.
So if you wanted to encourage bravery, for example, and lots of fantasy writers do this, the hero that's sticking up for himself and about fighting back and all of these sort of qualities, or perhaps they want to encourage more cerebral or to display a more cerebral approach to problems and thinking things through. And, that in a large way is a reflection of what goes on and what you think yourself is the way to approach these things. Not completely.
Yes. Right. And no, theme is a big thing with a lot of authors, and they try and figure out their theme and write it down and stuff. But I haven't been able to do that myself. It seems obviously it's a reflection of my thinking, but it just
Dropped
seems
again.
to come out and I discover it afterwards.
Yeah. You know, it's like Bob Dylan never really has a theme when he writes his great lyrics. It just is.
Right. Yeah, it just is. I agree. What are you doing to market the book and get the word out there about the book?
Well, yeah. In those terms, I'm not so great, to be honest. I'm not so keyed into the business side, but I use Twitter. I have my own website, which has loads of stuff that I've written, not from the book, but from 50 words and short stories and the like. And I actually have a little web series that I run on there, which is based on my apparently quite racy grandparents. Other things I do is I engage with Readsy and Goodreads and Facebook and all of these things. I'm not really a marketing expert, and I should spend more time with it. But there's two things. I always want to remind myself that ultimately, at the moment at least, this is a hobby. That sounds rather dismissive of it, and it's not meant to be, because in some ways, your hobby can still be your life.
Right.
But I'm well paid in my job. I would have to give up a lot of money to do this full time.
Yeah, and I think that is good for a lot of authors to hear, because they feel they aren't successful if they have to keep working another job. But it doesn't mean everybody feels that way and everybody wants to write 5-6 books a year or something like that.
Yeah, I have a friend who does write 5-6 books a year, and she is successful. And it's not her full time job. She also has a writing degree, and she teaches writing. And in a way, she's kind of a bit trapped. Uh, I'm sure she wouldn't agree with me saying this, but she's not here. Uh, she has to fulfill the commercial expectations of her publisher.
Right. And then she's being controlled
Yes,
essentially.
yes, and she's on radio talking about Robert Burns at Burns Night, which is something we have in Scotland, or she's on radio discussing the merits of the writing on a BBC production, or she does podcasts, and she certainly markets herself very well, and I'm sure her sales are way more than mine. But I don't read her books and say I wish I'd written that. And I do read her books and I enjoy them, but I don't envy her at the same time.
Right. And that's one of the reasons I've not even been interested in going traditional. Yeah, it could be an ego boost, but and I may actually make more money. I'm not sure, but it doesn't sound like I would. It sounds like I'd be doing just as much work as I am now.
I think she's
Um,
making a lot of money, to be fair.
well, that's good.
But there's plenty of traditional published that aren't making a lot of money. And you can be with a big publisher and you can get dropped. And as she says, because she teaches writing, she says, I have all these students and they're great writers and they want to be the next F. Scott Fitzgerald. And, it's not going to, that's not the way it works. It's probably not the way it ever worked.
Right.
And if I make 100 people happy, 200 people happy, because they read my book, then that's something. And my wife is a amateur. Again, that word makes it sound like I'm demeaning her as an artist. But she can make £200 an hour if she's got a commission. That's like $250 an hour. That's quite a big disparity. If you're looking to make money, there are better ways to do it than writing. Hello,
David.
I was just
Sorry
saying,
about that.
that's not a problem. I was just saying, if you're looking to make money, there's better ways to do it than writing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
But there aren't a whole lot of ways that are as much fun as writing.
If you're looking to touch people's lives, maybe not. Maybe writing is a better way to do it than most.
I agree. So before we end this first half of the interview part of the podcast, do you have any advice for new authors?
Enjoy yourself. It's meant to be fun. And if it's not fun, then you're not going. It's not worthwhile. Be happy be happy. It's a great thing to do. To enjoy yourself. That's my advice. That's my advice with everything. Whatever you're doing, enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a philosophy I've tried to get through to my kids. I mean, I used to work at a factory and it was hot and sweaty and long hours and it was repetitive and boring. But if I had the dark cloud mindset, it would have made those 12 hours the worst of my life ever. But had a good attitude and I got through it, and I almost look back on it fondly occasionally. It's a lot of, your mindset.
Absolutely. I worked in a factory too. I worked in a candy factory. Willy Wonka wasn't there, but it was a lot of fun.
No gold tickets.
No gold tickets. But what did happen was you got to eat the candy straight off.
All right. Well, David, tell us one more time where to find you online and what your book is called.
My book is called Crowman, and it's a dark fantasy published by Brainlag. It's available on Amazon and other online outlets. And my website is raydvdr at wordpress.com, and there's lots of free things that you can read on there that will keep you going for hours, and you should enjoy it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back in just a moment with the second half of the podcast.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.